Hey there, students. Today's my day off, but I'm not going to let that stop me from talking to you about mercantilism. But first, I'm going to give a shout out to Andy, more specifically at Candy_Andy_swims. Guy's serious about swimming, clearly. And he gave me a little bit of insta-spiration this morning. So go ahead and give him a shout out, because without him, I would probably just be doing something lazy instead of getting to work and teaching you a little bit. So let's go ahead and move on to the topic at hand, which is mercantilism, which I've branded the economics of absolutism. Now, if you're looking at this for an economics class, there may be a little too much historical context for you. We'll see. But really, I think it's important if you're studying Western Civ or European history to understand mercantilism, even in the case of U.S. history. When we look at the regulation of trade in the colonies, it's very important that the student of history understand the fundamental assumptions behind this economic system. And it's important, first of all, because a lot of people may not have had an economics class, to go ahead and discuss for just a little bit what economics is. Economics is the study of the production, distribution, and consumption of goods and services. So how do we produce it? How do we get stuff out there? And how is it consumed? And keep in mind, when we economize, we want to do something in the most efficient way possible. And there are different ideas about how to produce, distribute, and consume goods and services efficiently. And economics really goes down to the four economic questions and how you'd answer them. First of all, what should we produce? Second of all, how much should we produce? Third, how should we produce it? And fourth, who should consume it? Now, the type of economy that you have really comes down to how a society answers these questions. In a command economy, which is based on state control, the government or the central authority answers these questions. Mercantilism is a type of command economy. It is not a market economy. This is what we would refer to as economic liberalism in the European sense, not so much in the sense of American liberalism. But you've got these two types of economies. You've got the command, where there's a central authority, and then you've got the market economy, which is based on decisions made by individuals. And if you're studying mercantilism in the context of early modern Europe or U.S. history or something like that, Jean-Baptiste Colbert, who was Louis XIV's finance minister, is typically associated as being kind of the, not necessarily the first architect of mercantilism, but somebody who really kind of perfected it for France. And as Louis XIV's finance minister, is creating an economic system to support Louis's absolutist reforms. And Jean-Baptiste Colbert was a member of the bourgeoisie, the non-noble upper middle class, the professional class. He was the son of a wealthy merchant. Now, keep in mind, mercantilism comes from the same word as merchant. This is all about a philosophy of trade, not only external trade with other countries, but also internal trade within a country. So what is mercantilism? Let's go ahead and give you a standard definition of some sort, and then I'll elaborate. Mercantilism is a system of political and economic policy evolving with the modern national state and seeking to secure a nation's political and economic supremacy in its rivalry with other states. Keep in mind, rivalry. According to this system, money was regarded as the store of wealth, and the goal of the state was the accumulation of precious metals by exporting the largest possible quantity of its products and importing as little as possible, thus establishing a favorable balance of trade. Now, for those of you who just wanted a quick definition, you got it, but I hope you'll keep watching, because I'm going to talk about the economic assumptions of mercantilism and give this all a little bit of depth. So first of all, national wealth is measured in precious metals. How much bullion, how much gold and silver do you have? Okay, and the assumption here is that the wealth is finite. And this is where we get into things about a command economy, a market economy. Is economics about managing resources that are fixed, or is economics about trying to foster economic growth. But for a mercantilist, there's a limited amount of gold, there's a limited amount of silver, and we want to get as much as possible. Thanksgiving's coming up typically when I'm teaching mercantilism, and so I'm going to explain this in the context of a pumpkin pie, which is one of my favorites. A zero-sum game. Now, what is a zero-sum game? Now, you think about a standard pie can be divided into 8 pieces. Now, if there are 2 of us, then we could each get 4 pieces. Now, if I'm thinking like, hey, 4 pieces, that's just half a pie. I want to get more. Well, what I'm going to have to do is if there is only 1 pumpkin pie, I am going to have to take a piece away from someone else. So the whole idea of a zero-sum game is that there's only so much in the pie. And in order for me to get a bigger piece, you have to get a smaller piece. And that's the whole assumption here, that we are in a competition. A lot of football going on this week. Go Tigers, Clemson. But this is an economic rivalry. A mercantilist sees economics as a team sport where you need a coach. You can't just say, hey, we're going to go out there and we're playing. We don't need a coach calling the plays. A mercantilist says that would be crazy, and so you wouldn't go out there and play football without a coach. Well, you don't need to have an economy without a coach either. So Colbert and other mercantilists, they are trying to construct economies that are based on a favorable balance of trade. And what a favorable balance of trade is that exports should exceed imports. We should send out more goods than we take in. And therefore, when we send out goods, we collect that bullion, that gold and silver, and then we're left with more of that wealth, rather than if somebody imports more, then they're paying out more wealth. And since the object is to get more gold and silver, you need to export more than you import. And if you're studying U.S. history, this is why the British government was trying to control trade in the colonies, because they believed that, hey, we don't need the colonies just trading with whoever, because we need to preserve this favorable balance of trade. Self-sufficiency is very important in the context of mercantilism, because if we're going to export more than we import, then we need to be able to run our own economy. We don't need to depend on stuff coming from other countries. So essentially, we are trying to create what you might have thought about in previous generations as a mercantile store. Now, we don't really call anything a mercantile store anymore, but when you look here, you see that you have lanterns, you have bowls and plates. It looks like we've got some kind of flower. I don't know if that calendar's for sale or not. You got the Coca-Cola lady there in the corner. You've really got a little bit of everything. And in your grandparents' generation, you had the mercantile store where you would just go and get some odds and ends. If you've ever been to a Cracker Barrel, this is kind of a modern mercantile store where you walk in, there's just all this random stuff. Another example of a mercantile store would be Walmart, where what's not at Walmart? They've got just about everything. So this is what we're thinking about, that we're trying to turn our country into a Walmart. That's kind of scary, but it's what it is. So the goal here is to promote domestic manufacturing. If we're going to be self-sufficient, then we need to create as many products within our country as we can, so that we don't have to depend on other countries, so we don't have to import. And if you're going to do that, if you're going to encourage domestic manufacturing and discourage imports, you're going to have to regulate some things, because typically if there's another country that's better at producing something, if they can make it cheaper or better, no matter how patriotic I am, my inclination is going to be to import that cheaper, better stuff. So you're going to need economic regulation in terms of promoting this domestic manufacturing. Protectionism. What protectionism is when a government passes laws to discourage trade. And in this, you're trying to limit foreign competition. Again, trying to limit imports and encourage exports and self-sufficiency. Imports threaten domestic industry. If I'm importing some sort of product, well, people are buying that. They're not buying what's made right here in this country. So you want to protect domestic manufacturers from foreign competition and also from domestic competition. In a lot of cases, mercantilists would regulate who can produce something within the country. Keep in mind, this is a command economy. So not only is it about regulating foreign trade, but it's also about regulating who is producing, how much they're producing right here in this country. In order to promote domestic manufacturing and to control who is producing, how much they're producing, and all of that, the government would offer incentives in order to create this mercantilist economy. This, unlike Adam Smith's invisible hand, this is a hands-on approach. So keep in mind when you're looking at different economic systems that Adam Smith's hand is invisible. See, it's like, where'd my hand go? I guess it's invisible. Well, now this is hands-on, okay? Mercantilist is thinking, let's put our hands on the economy and control it. So some of the symptoms of this hands-on approach are subsidies, which are cash payments in order to encourage someone to produce a certain thing. Then monopoly. Someone may have an exclusive right to produce something where nobody else in the country can produce it. Then finally, protective tariffs. This stops foreign competition. That way, if I've got subsidies, then it's easier for me to produce because I've got some startup capital. Then I've got a monopoly. Nobody can compete with me from within the country. And with a protective tariff, which is a tax on imports to try to stop imports, I don't have foreign competition. And this is going to allow the government to control the economy to the ends that it desires. And the whole point of these incentives is to eliminate risk. Now, risk, when you look at something from the perspective of a market economy, risk and competition, these are good things. But a mercantilist sees this as distracting. You think about, you don't want competition within the team. This is a team sport. Whereas economic liberalism or laissez-faire economics is about individualism. But this is not about individualism. This is about a national rivalry. And when you think about Versailles, Louis XIV, when he built this palace at Versailles, tried to showcase a lot of French manufacturing and a lot of the things that he was trying to encourage to be made right there in France. And a few of the preferred industries that Louis and Colbert had, which are kind of consistent throughout Europe at this time, would be luxury goods. Now keep in mind that the French are still known for their luxury goods. If you've got French furs or French wine or French cheese or something like that, luxury goods. French, it must be good because it was made in France. Then shipping. You want to have shipyards and that sort of thing so you can build ships to export all your stuff. And then finally, armaments. And this is something that even today, we would much rather armaments be made right here within the country than outside of the country and brought in and imported. I don't want to depend on somebody else for tanks and planes and all that kind of stuff when I would much rather be in a situation, even if we had to pay a little more, let's produce that right here. I'm okay with that. So luxury goods, shipping, and armaments are a few of the industries that Colbert and Louis XIV were trying to promote. And keep in mind also that some of you may be watching this in the context of U.S. history, that when you look at colonies, this is a must because you can't produce everything within England or within France or anywhere like that. You are going to need these colonies so that you can expand your pool of natural resources. So the whole point here is that the colonies, they're members of the team, and that's why you had the conflicts between the American colonies and the British government, because the American colonies wanted to trade with other countries, wanted to do whatever they were able to do for the cheapest, and the British are thinking, no, you can't go trade with the other team. That's not how this works. So when you look at different French colonies, you look at Canada, where the French could import furs, import within French colonies. Louisiana, where they could get raw materials, lumber, maybe some crawfish and that sort of stuff. That's where I'm from originally. And then Saint Domingue, which today is Haiti, in the Caribbean, where they could get sugar. And sugar was really the #1 cash crop at this time. If you could produce sugar, everybody's into it. Of course, everybody's still into sugar, but this was like the big thing then. It was like, sugar! Yeah, it's so good. All right, but anyway, these are the colonies, and this is the whole point, that we produce things in-house. So the whole point of colonies is to expand the house and to create a self-sufficient economy where we can all work as one big international team instead of trading with other countries. So the whole point here is that you create really a market, and whether it's French colonies, whether it's English colonies, where the colonies provide raw materials, and in return, they consume finished goods made in the other country. So you've got a system of internal trade that replaces a system of external trade, which would be the alternative. So this is the whole point of colonies. Maybe you're understanding this, especially if you're looking at this in the context of U.S. history. So colonies are expected to trade exclusively with the mother country, and protective tariffs discourage trade with other nations and other colonies. Now, as far as some of the disadvantages, one of the clear disadvantages of government control of the economy is when individuals make decisions, they tend to make a decision that's best for them. But a lot of times when government officials are making decisions, it may go to, who's going to make ships or who's going to make armaments. Well, I've got this buddy here, or I owe this guy a favor, or this person paid me a bribe, or something like that. So keep in mind that sometimes it's the people who are closest to the decision-making authority rather than the people who can do it the best. And a market economy just kind of lets everybody compete, and whoever can do it the cheapest and the best gets to do it. But in this case, if you can do it the cheapest and the best, it doesn't matter, because if you don't have the permit, then you can't produce. So there's some economic inefficiency here, and that's why mercantilism isn't so much in vogue today, where there's a lot more emphasis on free trade. Now, since it's almost Thanksgiving, one thing that I tend to do with my students is we make mercantilism hand turkeys. I just find it funny. They call them Merc Turks. What we typically do is we look at all of these different aspects of mercantilism: exports over imports, bullion, the gold and silver, self-sufficiency, regulation, protection, subsidies, monopolies, tariffs, colonialism, and corruption. So keep all this in mind. Like, all of these words here are words that you could use to describe mercantilism, this command economy that is based on the concept of economic rivalry rather than the free market and free trade. And that about wraps us up for mercantilism. If you feel like you learned something, subscribe to my channel. Check out my website, tomrichey.net. I'm on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. I would love to interact with you online. Like, dislike, comment, all of that stuff. Thank you so much for watching, and I will be back soon. Until next time.